but for some, the rush of the ongoing conversation surrounding sexual assault, and much of the narrative about I've wondered where exactly I fit into this dialogue, because I'm a non-binary person who was assigned female at birth, and, well, there are memories I poke and pick at from time to time like a bit of raw skin, a painful reminder that both myself and my experiences are legitimate and real. One came flashing back the other day. When I was younger, I had gotten suckered into one of those summer canvassing jobs with a progressive organization. I was bent over filling out my paperwork at the end of a long day when a manager turned to me unprompted and said, "It's too bad you're a lesbian, because you have a great ass." At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was so used to being harassed, leered at, or asked invasive questions about my body and my non-normative gender that this act of sexual harassment by a cisgender man in a position of power felt almost innocuous. That experience isn't unusual for trans people. Arya *, a 23-year-old trans woman of color, relates to feeling that cisgender people hold a sense of entitlement to her body. "I've had a lot of chasers who find out I'm trans, or cis men who are attracted to me feel like they can just do whatever because I'm viewed as abnormal," she says. Experiences of sexual assault are devastatingly common among trans people. Nearly half of all respondents to the 2015 U.S. Transgender survey reported facing sexual assault at some point in their lives. Non-binary people who were assigned female at birth are especially susceptible, with 58% reporting having experienced it. Those numbers also skyrocket for people of color, particularly Indigenous Americans and multiracial and Middle Eastern people. Factors such as being a sex worker or having done sex work at some point, having experienced homelessness, and being a person with disabilities make a trans person even more likely to have been sexually assaulted. Still, despite the prevalence of sexual assault against trans people, we face what I think of as a barrier to belief. We too often have doubt cast on our decisions, our identities, and the legitimacy of the issues we face every single day. Cisgender people are given the privilege to unravel the flimsy threads that hold our truths in place at any moment, and so our experiences of sexual assault are often seen as impossible. Or worse, we are expected to view any kind of sexual attention or contact as a favor, even if non-consensual, because in a world where being cisgender is the norm, trans people are told we should be grateful to receive any attention at all. I often think to myself, if I told anyone what that manager had done, would it make a difference? Would I be believed? Blake *, a black gender variant 26-year-old, has experienced such a barrier to belief firsthand. Despite the fact that their assailant had been known to be predatory and aggressive, people were quick to cast doubt on Blake's experiences. Often, anything that frames a trans person as the one who's been harmed quickly leads to victim blaming. In most of the few times that I was believed, the friend or family member that I disclosed what happened to was quick to attribute some or all of the responsibility to me. Blake says, "So much so that I try not to talk about my assault at all." Blake is far from alone. And I think it is a complex tangle of both systemic and internalized transphobia that make trans people both more vulnerable to sexual assault and more reluctant to come forward with our stories. From the time that I came out as trans, I began to internalize the feeling that I was unlovable. I have sometimes become so desperate for affection that I've normalized non-consensual behaviors in many relationships. In situations with people with whom I've had ongoing sexual relationships, I've often wondered whether I have the right to say no. And I've worried that if I was too demanding about consent, I might be perceived as being difficult or a hassle on top of being trans. The good news is that there is a way forward. In order to breach the barrier to belief for trans people, I believe we need to push for a shift in narrative surrounding sexual assault. It must be understood that rape culture is not simply a problem of cisgender heterosexuality, but a product of toxic masculinity that has wide-ranging effects on people of many genders. Here's another memory I sometimes pull from thin air. I had just started on testosterone and was at a party with my friends. A cisgender woman came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder and shouted at me over the music, "Hey, just play along." I was taken off guard and a little tipsy, so I let her pull me into dance. A few beats later she forcibly turned me around, bent me over at the waist, and moved a hand toward my crotch. She groped around for a few seconds, then, seeming to have gotten the answer she was looking for, released me and walked back to the bar. When I turned back to see her, she was laughing with her friends and they were all staring at me. My gender, my body and my selfhood had been the subject of a bet, broken down into an object to be prodded, inspected, and discarded at will. I left the bar with a deep sense of shame, as though what had happened was somehow my fault. Unfortunately, Blake has also experienced the particular struggle of having been assaulted by a cisgender woman and the barrier to being believed in the aftermath. I think it's difficult for people to understand how someone so outspoken, visibly queer, and often viewed as aggressive and very sexualized could be assaulted. Blake says. In the midst of but as with any social issue, identifying the problem isn't enough. A shift in narrative can only do so much if it's not paired with resources to support transgender survivors and a larger movement toward understanding transgender people and our experiences. E.g. *, a 37-year-old white trans femme, sums this fact up aptly. I have resources, but it's a handful of them. We need more of them, but first it starts with education, she says. Cis humans need to understand that I'm not a fetish or even an experiment. I have feelings just as you. Arya adds, the representation isn't there for trans people. I think people just lump us in with being gay, lesbian, or bi. Trans people too often struggle to access the sexual assault resources we need, particularly because resources for survivors are often gendered. Those of us who identify as non-binary struggle to find spaces to heal it all, while those who do identify as men and women must navigate the everyday cis-sexism of gendered spaces while trying their best to move on. As Blake relates, the resources they can access are often aimed at straight cisgender women, making it difficult for them to feel the degree of comfort and safety I need to accept the support that I sought out, they say. When they're in these spaces, they're so conscious of the space they take up as someone masculine of center that they often wind up doing a lot of emotional labor, and not necessarily getting the support they need. What's important to remember in the months and years to come is that organizations doing work to support survivors should become more inclusive of trans people, and that the national conversation about sexual assault includes trans people as well. We need to be represented in materials and campaigns aimed at educating people about sexual assault. We need organizations that support survivors to hire trans people and educate staff on transgender issues. We need trans people to play a central role in steering initiatives that work to end sexual assault and rape culture. We need cisgender allies to support us and uplift our voices. And, most importantly, we need to be believed. If you're a transgender person and you need support, the following organizations may be able to help. Forget Trans Lifeline, RAIN Survivor Resource, National Coalition for Anti-Violence Projects *. The first names of interviewees have been used in order to protect their identities. All identity labels from interviewees are offered in their own words. K.C. Clements is a queer, non-binary writer, speaker, and educator based in Brooklyn, NY. Their work has been featured on The Establishment, Bustle, Into, Go Magazine, Huffington Post, Healthline, and more.